They say power is the ultimate currency, but on a cold Tuesday at JFK, a man with billions was told he wasn't rich enough. He was standing at the gates of paradise, the Global Voyager Alliance's first-class lounge, a world of champagne and whispers. But for the staff, his black skin was a red flag. They saw a threat, not a titan. They humiliated him, questioned him, and finally denied him. What they didn't know: they weren't just disrespecting a passenger. They were disrespecting their new boss. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about a reckoning. And the hard truth that sometimes the karma you send out comes back with an invoice you can never hope to pay. The air in the Global Voyager Alliance, first-class lounge at JFK's Terminal 4, was a carefully curated masterpiece. It was a symphony of hushed conversations, the gentle clinking of crystal on marble, and the distant, reassuring hiss of a high-end espresso machine. The scent was a bespoke blend of Italian leather, freshly cut lilies, and the faint, citrusy tang of complimentary champagne. This was a sanctuary, a hermetically sealed bubble designed to insulate its inhabitants from the plebeian chaos of modern air travel. It was a world built on exclusion, and Isabelle Dubois was its proud, unyielding gatekeeper. Isabelle, the lounge manager, stood behind the gleaming obsidian podium with a posture honed by 2 decades of serving and judging the ultra-elite. Her uniform was immaculate, a tailored navy blue suit that was severe yet elegant. Her blonde hair was pulled into a chignon so tight it seemed to pull her facial features into a permanent state of faint disapproval. She viewed her role not as one of hospitality, but of curation. She wasn't welcoming guests. She was protecting the sanctity of the space from the unworthy. Her subordinate, Marco Rossi, a young man with sharp features and an even sharper desire to please, mirrored her vigilance. He was the first line of defense. When a man approached their post, Marco's eyes did a swift, practiced calculation. The man was black. He wore a simple dark grey hoodie, unadorned, no garish logos, but the fabric draped with the unmistakable weight of high-quality cashmere. His jeans were dark, perfectly fitted, and his sneakers were minimalist white leather. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe, but its design was so understated it was almost stealthy. To a connoisseur, the man's attire screamed quiet, astronomical wealth. To Marco and Isabelle, it screamed out of place. The man, David Sterling, placed a black metallic card on the counter. It was the GVA Centurion Solitaire, a by-invitation-only card that was the stuff of legend among airline staff. It granted near-limitless access and privileges. Most desk agents went their entire careers without seeing one. Marco picked it up. The metal was heavier than he expected. He swiped it. The computer beeped a cheerful affirmative sound. The screen glowed with David's name and his flight details. Sterling David. Flight 001 to London. First Suite 1A. Below it, in bold green letters, Solitaire Status. Unrestricted Lounge Access. Alliance VIP 1. Marco frowned. The system said yes, but his gut, conditioned by Isabelle's mentorship, said no. He glanced at Isabelle. She gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. "I'm sorry, sir." Marco began, his voice taking on a formal, slightly condescending tone. "I'm having a little trouble verifying this card." David Sterling looked at him, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry or impatient. He was observant. "The system seems to have verified it," he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. It beeped. A green light, I believe. Yes, well, these systems can have glitches, Isabel interjected, stepping forward. She picked up the card, turning it over in her fingers, as if it were a curious forgery. And our lounge has a strict dress code policy. We strive to maintain a certain business-like ambiance. She gestured vaguely at his hoodie. David looked down at his own chest, then around the lounge. He saw a man in his 60s wearing bright pink Bermuda shorts and a polo shirt. His face flushed from 2 pre-flight whiskeys. He saw a woman in yoga pants and a messy bun scrolling through her phone. His ambiance seems quite relaxed, David noted, nodding subtly toward the man in shorts. Is the policy specifically for cashmere, or is it a general prohibition on comfortable clothing? Isabel's lips thinned. She despised being questioned. The policy is at the discretion of the management. And this card? She tapped it on the counter. It's an unusual issue. We see them so rarely we have to be extra cautious. For security purposes, you understand. I understand completely, David said. Security is paramount. Perhaps you could call the number on the back. I'm sure the Solitaire Concierge Service would be happy to vouch for both me and the card. This was a direct challenge to her authority. Calling the concierge would expose her obstruction as baseless. It would be an admission that she was wrong. Isabelle Dubois was never wrong. That won't be necessary, she said coolly. Given the verification issues and the dress code, I'm afraid we won't be able to grant you access today. The main terminal has several very nice coffee shops. I'm sure you'll find something suitable there. The finality in her tone was absolute. The phrase suitable for you hung in the air, unspoken but deafeningly loud. A few nearby passengers were now openly staring. An older white man in a tailored suit shook his head with a "can you believe the nerve of some people" expression. A younger woman looked down at her lap, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. David Sterling felt a familiar cold weight settle in his gut. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in over a decade, a ghost from a past life where his worth was constantly being questioned in rooms he had every right to be in. He had spent his entire career building empires of code and capital, creating companies that shaped how the world communicated, all to build a fortress against this exact type of petty, humiliating bigotry. Yet here at the door of a glorified waiting room, the fortress had been breached by a woman with a tight bun and a rule book she wielded like a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead his case. He simply held Isabel's gaze. I see he said the 2 words carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations. He took a slow, deliberate look around the lounge at the polished floors, the art on the walls, the self-satisfied patrons. He wasn't just looking at a room. He was taking inventory. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't storm off. He didn't complain. He stepped to the side of the entrance, out of the way of other passengers, and made a call. Isabel and Marco watched him, a smug sense of victory on their faces. They had done their job. They had protected the sanctum. Marco even allowed himself a small, triumphant smirk. They had put the man in the hoodie in his place. David spoke softly into the phone. James. Good morning. Apologies for the early call. Yes, everything's fine. I'm at the JFK T4 lounge, the Global Voyager Lounge. I seem to have been denied entry. No, not a full flight. It appears to be a management discretion issue. Listen, could you do something for me? I need you to get Robert Harrison on the phone. Yes, the Executive VP of North American Operations for GVA. Tell him the new owner of the majority stake in his parent company. Sterling Equity is standing outside his flagship lounge, and would like a word. Give him 5 minutes to get here. Thanks. He hung up. He leaned against the wall, calm and still, and he waited. Isabel and Marco hadn't heard the specifics of the call, only the calm, authoritative tone. They exchanged a look of mild amusement. Who was he calling? His mummy. His lawyer. It didn't matter. The decision was final. 3 minutes later, a tremor went through the lounge. It started not as a sound, but as a feeling, a shift in the atmosphere. A side door, one reserved for senior staff, burst open. Robert Harrison, a tall, perpetually flustered man, known for his slicked-back hair and anxiety-fueled energy, came power-walking through the lounge. His tie was slightly askew, and a bead of sweat was tracing a path down his temple. He wasn't walking. He was scrambling. His eyes, wide with panic, scanned the entrance area, flying past David before a delayed signal in his brain forced him to backtrack. His face went from flushed to ghostly white. Mr. Sterling. Harrison stammered, his voice cracking. He practically skidded to a halt in front of David, his arms flapping uselessly at his sides. Sir, I am so sorry. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding. Isabel and Marco froze. The blood drained from their faces. Mr. Sterling, the new owner. It wasn't possible. The news of the acquisition by Sterling Equity was still under wraps, known only to the highest echelons of the board. It wasn't supposed to be public for another week. David Sterling finally pushed himself off the wall. He gave Harrison a cool, appraising look. Robert, you made it in under 5 minutes. Impressive. I came as soon as I heard Sir Harrison babbled, wiping his brow. He shot a venomous, terrified glare at Isabel and Marco. I don't know what these imbeciles have done, but I assure you it is not representative of Global Voyager Alliance. Not at all. David's gaze shifted to Isabel. The quiet observer was gone. In his place was a man who owned the very air they were breathing. Isabel, is it? He asked, his voice still quiet. But now it held the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Isabel couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up. She could only nod, her body trembling. Isabel David continued, stepping closer to the podium. You mentioned your concern for the lounge's ambiance. You talked about discretion and policy. Let me tell you about my policy. My policy is that talent, character, and success are not defined by the color of a person's skin or the style of their clothes. My policy is that a customer, any customer, let alone one holding this card, he flicked the solitaire card on the counter, is to be treated with baseline human respect. A respect you and your colleague here seem to find discretionary. He turned to Marco, who looked like he was about to faint. And you. You looked at the data. The computer told you I belonged here. But you chose to trust your prejudice instead. That's not a glitch, as your manager called it. That's a flaw in your own character. He looked back at the terrified Robert Harrison. Robert, I am not a vengeful man. I am a businessman, and what I witnessed here tonight was not just rudeness. It was a brand liability. It was a cancer at the heart of the customer experience you claim to sell. And like any cancer, it needs to be cut out. Immediately. He looked back at the two disgraced employees. Their smugness had evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Isabel Dubois and Marco Rossi. David Sterling announced, his voice echoing in the now silent lounge. Your employment with Global Voyager Alliance and any of its affiliates is terminated. Effective immediately, your final paychecks will be mailed to you. Security will now escort you from the premises. Please collect your personal belongings on your way out." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. "Your concern for the exclusivity of this lounge is now moot. You no longer have access." The firing of Isabelle Dubois and Marco Rossi was not a quiet affair. It was a surgical strike executed in a glass operating theater. As two stern-faced security guards materialized and stood by the podium, the hushed whispers in the lounge swelled into a low, buzzing murmur. Patrons who had moments before been sipping complimentary Veuve Clicquot were now craning their necks, their faces a mixture of shock, schadenfreude, and dawning apprehension. They had just witnessed a public execution of careers, and the executioner was now walking among them. Robert Harrison, still sweating profusely, practically bowed as he gestured for David to enter the lounge. "Mr. Sterling, please. A private suite for you, of course. Whatever you desire. Champagne, Macallan, 25. A hot meal." David waved a dismissive hand. "Get me a bottle of water, Robert. And get your head of HR and your head of PR on a conference call. I want them patched through to my suite in 10 minutes. Isabelle stood, frozen, her mind a screaming vortex of denial. This couldn't be happening. She was Isabelle Dubois. She had served royalty movie stars, titans of industry. She was the guardian of the GVA standard. To be dismissed so publicly, so clinically by a man in a hoodie, it was an annihilation of her entire professional identity. Marco was a different story. The bravado had shattered, and raw panic was flooding the void. He was 29 years old, with a car payment, a condo mortgage in Queens, and a mountain of student debt. This job, with its perks and veneer of glamour, was the central pillar of his life. He looked at Isabelle, hoping for guidance, for a sign, but she was a statue of shattered pride. The security guard, a large man with impassive eyes, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, sir? This way, please." The walk of shame was excruciating. It was only 50 yards from the podium past the bar and to the staff exit, but it felt like miles. Every eye in the lounge was on them. They were no longer staff. They were pariahs. As Isabelle passed the man in the Bermuda shorts, he audibly snorted, "Serves you right." The woman in the yoga pants just shook her head, a look of pity on her face that was somehow even more galling than the man's contempt. When the staff door clicked shut behind them, the curated elegance of the lounge was gone, replaced by the stark, fluorescent-lit reality of a cinder-block hallway. The sound of their footsteps echoed with a hollow finality. Their GVA careers were over. Inside his private suite, a spacious room with its own bathroom daybed and a panoramic view of the tarmac, David Sterling was not celebrating. He felt no joy, no triumphant rush. The cold knot in his stomach had loosened, but it was replaced by a familiar, weary anger. This wasn't a victory. It was a symptom of a disease he had naively thought his success had inoculated him against. He had built sterling equity from a single algorithm he'd coded in his dorm room into a multi-billion-dollar global investment firm. He specialized in finding legacy companies, bogged down by inefficiency and archaic thinking, acquiring them and rebuilding them from the inside out with cutting-edge technology and ruthless efficiency. He bought rust and turned it into chrome. Global Voyager Alliance's parent company, AeroCorp International, was his biggest acquisition to date, a sprawling, prestigious, but deeply troubled giant. He had spent 6 months in due diligence, poring over financial statements, operational reports, and fuel hedging strategies. He knew their debt-to-equity ratio by heart. What he hadn't quantified, what couldn't be captured on a spreadsheet, was the rot in its culture. The incident at the lounge wasn't just about two racist employees. It was a data point that signified a systemic failure. If this was the attitude at their flagship lounge, in their most important hub, what was happening in Coach at the check-in counters in Dallas, in the call centers in Manila? The brand which was supposed to signify premium service was a lie. And David Sterling did not invest in lies. The conference call was brutal. Harrison, now in the suite with David, listened on a speakerphone, his face aging in real time. "This is not a PR problem to be managed," David's voice cut through the line, sharp and clear. "Do not draft a press release about an isolated incident and a commitment to diversity. I am not interested in lip service. This is a cultural crisis." The head of PR, a woman named Annette, tried to interject. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, a story like this could spiral. Billionaire owner fires lounge staff can be spun in very unflattering ways. We need to control the narrative." "The narrative is that two of your employees in a flagship location racially profiled a customer." David countered his voice dangerously low. "The fact that the customer happened to be me is irrelevant. It could have been anyone. What if it was a prominent surgeon, a diplomat, a regular hard-working person who saved up all year for a first-class ticket for their anniversary? The story is not what I did. It's what they did. And it's my new job to fix the culture that allowed them to feel comfortable doing it." He continued, laying out his orders with military precision. "First, I want an immediate top-to-bottom review of all customer-facing training protocols, not by your internal teams who are clearly part of the problem. I want to bring in an outside firm, one that specializes in unconscious bias and genuine customer service, not just rote memorization of scripts. Second, I want the lounge dress code policy abolished, immediately, across the entire network. If a customer has a valid premium class ticket, they can board the plane naked for all I care, as long as they get to their seat. The idea that you are judging a person's worthiness based on their sweater is an absurdity from the 1950s. Third, you, Robert, are going to personally oversee this. You will report to me directly every Friday with a progress report. Your job now hangs on your ability to detoxify this company's culture." There was a stunned silence on the line. This was not how things were done. Corporate change was slow, incremental, managed by committees and focus groups. David Sterling was taking a sledgehammer to the foundations. "And Janet," he added, his tone softening slightly, "you're right about one thing. We need to get ahead of the story. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to leak it. Not all of it, just the basics. Find a reliable reporter at the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. Tell them a high-level GVA executive was recently denied entry to their own lounge, leading to the immediate dismissal of the staff involved, and a company-wide policy overhaul. Don't use my name. Frame it as the actions of a new aggressive management team hell-bent on reform. Let the world know that the old way of doing business at GVA is over." He was turning their potential PR nightmare into a declaration of war against the company's own worst instincts. Meanwhile, the story was already spreading organically. A finance blogger who had been in the lounge and recognized David from a magazine cover had already posted a breathless, slightly inaccurate account on Twitter. "Insane scene at JFK GVA Lounge. Saw David Sterling of Sterling Equity get denied entry. Heard yelling. Staff looked terrified. Then they were literally frog-marched out. Something big is happening at GVA." The tweet exploded. By the time David's flight was taxiing for takeoff, the internet was ablaze. The names Isabelle Dubois and Marco Rossi were being passed around in private airline employee forums with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. Their LinkedIn profiles were discovered and screenshotted. By morning, they would be infamous, their faces and actions picked apart by a global mob of digital vigilantes. As the plane climbed over the Atlantic, David finally took a sip of his water. He looked out the window at the endless blue expanse. He had come to New York to finalize the largest deal of his life. He was supposed to be celebrating. Instead, he felt like he had just enlisted in a war he never intended to fight. He had bought an airline, but he had inherited a broken culture. Building his fortress of success hadn't been enough. Now, he had to tear down the old one and build something new in its place, brick by painful brick. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the old guard, the people who benefited from the rot, would not go down without a fight. The week following the JFK incident was a blur of controlled demolition. David Sterling, operating from a temporary command center in his London office, directed the corporate upheaval at GVA with the precision of a remote drone strike. His directives were not suggestions, they were edicts. The old training manuals filled with corporate jargon and hollow pleasantries were digitally shredded. In their place, a new curriculum was commissioned, designed by a renowned sociologist and a team of behavioral psychologists. It focused on empathy de-escalation and situational awareness. Role-playing scenarios were no longer about upselling credit cards. They were about handling cultural misunderstandings and recognizing unconscious bias. The no dress code policy was implemented globally, causing a minor revolt among older, more traditional managers who were swiftly offered early retirement packages they couldn't refuse. David's anonymous leak worked exactly as planned. The story framed as a new decisive management team cleaning house cast Sterling Equity's takeover in a positive, proactive light. GVA's stock, after an initial wobble, actually rose. The message was clear. Change was here, and it was profitable. For Isabelle Dubois and Marco Rossi. However, the world had shrunk to the size of their glowing screens, and that world was uniformly hostile. Isabelle cocooned in her meticulously clean Upper West Side apartment, watched her life unravel online. Her name, once a symbol of authority in her small world, was now a meme for entitled racism, a Karen of the skies. She was inundated with hateful emails and social media messages. Friends she'd had for years suddenly stopped returning her calls, their silence a quiet act of social distancing. She tried applying for other jobs in the luxury hospitality sector, but the moment her name was Googled, the conversation would turn cold. The digital ghost of her actions at the podium haunted her every move. She felt profoundly wronged. She wasn't a racist, she told herself, pacing her hardwood floors. She was a professional. She had been upholding a standard, a policy. The man hadn't looked the part. It was a simple misjudgment, a mistake anyone could have made. But the world didn't see a mistake. It saw a bigot, and it had passed its sentence. Her pride, the very core of her being, curdled into a bitter, helpless rage. Marco's experience was different, a descent into a spiral of shame and regret. He fled to his parents' home in New Jersey, unable to face the glares of his neighbors in Queens. He couldn't afford his condo anymore anyway. He replayed the scene over and over in his head. The smug look on his face, the condescending tone in his voice. He had been so desperate for Isabel's approval, so eager to be part of the in-group that judged the world from behind their obsidian desk, that he had silenced his own conscience. The system beeped green. The facts were right in front of him. He had made a choice, and that choice had ruined him. Unlike Isabel, he knew deep in his gut that he deserved it. The knowledge was a lead weight in his soul. While their lives were imploding, David was discovering the true scale of the problem at GVA. The rot was deeper and more insidious than he could have imagined. He wasn't just fighting prejudice. He was fighting a deeply entrenched culture of apathy and sabotage. His new open feedback portal for employees, designed to flag issues, was flooded with thousands of anonymous reports. Flight attendants detailed how senior pursers would hoard premium meals for themselves, leaving first-class passengers with subpar choices. Maintenance crews wrote of being pressured by mid-level managers to sign off on minor cosmetic repairs that bordered on being safety issues to keep planes on schedule and hit bonus targets. Pilots complained about outdated navigation software that the company had refused to pay to upgrade. The airline wasn't just culturally sick, it was operationally compromised, held together by duct tape and the fear of speaking up. The incident with Isabel and Marco wasn't an anomaly. It was a perfect representation of the GVA ethos: prioritize appearance over substance, policy over people. Robert Harrison, the terrified VP, became David's unwilling guide through this corporate underworld. Under the constant threat of his own termination, Harrison was remarkably cooperative. He began forwarding David internal emails and reports that had previously been buried, revealing a pattern of deliberate mismanagement. "You have to understand, Mr. Sterling," Harrison explained during one late-night call, his voice strained. "AeroCorp has been run by the same dozen guys for 30 years. They're all from the same business schools, belong to the same country clubs. They don't see this as a business. They see it as their personal fiefdom. They're not against progress because they're evil. They're against it because it's inconvenient. It requires new work, new thinking. It disrupts their comfortable status quo." The leader of this old guard was a man named Arthur Kensington, the chief operating officer and a legend within the industry. He was silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and possessed a charm so potent it could disarm regulators and union leaders alike. He had publicly welcomed Sterling Equity's acquisition, speaking of a new era of innovation. But in private he viewed David as a vulgar tech bro, an upstart who didn't understand the delicate, complex dance of the airline world. David knew that Kensington and his loyalists were the true source of the rot. Firing them all at once would be corporate suicide, triggering a brain drain and spooking the market. He had to outmaneuver them. He had to beat them at their own game. And that's when the hard karma began to swing back. The first attack was subtle. A negative story appeared on a popular, notoriously scrupulous financial blog. The piece, citing anonymous sources from within Sterling Equity, detailed how David's firm often used aggressive, predatory tactics to acquire smaller tech startups, absorbing their IP and then gutting the staff. The story was a gross distortion, twisting standard acquisition practices into something sinister. But it was seeded with just enough truth to be plausible. David dismissed it as a nuisance. But then came the second attack. An internal GVA memo was leaked to a major news network. The memo, written by David, outlined a radical proposal for dynamic fleet allocation using AI to predict demand and reroute planes, which could potentially lead to the downsizing of smaller, less profitable regional hubs. The memo was a blue-sky thought experiment, one of 100 ideas he was exploring. But when leaked, it was framed as a secret plan to kill jobs in Middle America. Union leaders were outraged. Politicians from affected states made angry pronouncements on cable news. The narrative began to shift. David Sterling was no longer the progressive reformer. He was a ruthless, vulture capitalist, a Silicon Valley predator coming to destroy a great American company. The final blow was personal and devastatingly effective. A story broke on a sleazy tabloid website, complete with grainy photos. It alleged that a charitable foundation David had established years ago to provide scholarships for underprivileged youth in STEM had questionable financial structures. The implication was clear. It was a tax shelter, a PR front. The photos were of him on a yacht with several well-known venture capitalists taken years ago at a fundraiser. But now they were presented as evidence of his decadent hypocrisy. David felt a cold fury he hadn't experienced before. This was different from the lounge. The attack at the lounge was born of ignorance. This was sophisticated, calculated, and designed to hit him where he was most proud, his self-made reputation and his philanthropy. They weren't just questioning his right to be in a room. They were questioning his entire life's work, his very character. He was in his office looking at the tabloid story on his monitor when Robert Harrison called. The VP's voice was shaking. "Mr. Sterling, you need to see this. It's an internal chat log from the senior operations team. I think you're being sabotaged." Harrison forwarded him a file. It was a screenshot of a supposedly secure chat channel used by Arthur Kensington and two of his most loyal VPs. The messages were damning. Kensington. "The tech story is getting good traction. The union angle is next. We need to keep the pressure on. Make him look like the enemy." VP1. "The foundation story is ready to drop. It's thin, but it's dirty. Mud sticks. Kensington excellent. He thinks he can come in here and change our world overnight. He needs to understand that some machines have ghosts in them, and our ghosts bite back." David stared at the last message. Our ghosts bite back. The hard karma had arrived. He had used the court of public opinion to dismantle the careers of two low-level employees who had wronged him. Now the masters of that game were using it to try and dismantle him. He had exposed the rot, and now the rot was fighting back with a chilling intelligence. The battle for Global Voyager Alliance was no longer about updating training manuals. It was a war against the ghost in the machine, and David Sterling was its primary target. The discovery of the chat log changed everything. The vague sense of being under attack crystallized into the cold, hard certainty of a conspiracy. For David Sterling, the fight was no longer philosophical. It was personal. Arthur Kensington and his cabal hadn't just resisted his changes. They had declared a covert war, using leaks and lies as their weapons. David, a man who had built his empire on data and logic, was now faced with an enemy that thrived in the shadows of insinuation and bad faith. He didn't rage. He didn't fire off angry emails. He went into what his closest associates called deep focus mode. The world outside his immediate objective ceased to exist. For 3 days he barely slept. Fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning anger, along with a tight, loyal circle from Sterling Equity, launched a counter-investigation. They were no longer just trying to reform an airline. They were hunting saboteurs. They treated GVA's corporate network like a hostile territory. His cybersecurity team, the best in the business, initiated a deep forensic audit of all executive-level communications. They weren't looking for content. They were looking for patterns. Who emailed which journalists? Who accessed sensitive documents outside of normal working hours? Who was using private servers to communicate? While his tech wizards dug through the digital trenches, David focused on the human element. He used the one weapon the old guard didn't understand, and consistently underestimated money. He hired a team of top-tier private investigators, discreet professionals who operated in the world of corporate espionage. Their targets were the two VPs from Kensington's chat log. They were tasked with finding leverage any personal, financial, or professional vulnerabilities that could be exploited. It was a brutal tactic, one he rarely employed, but Kensington had made it clear this was a war with no rules. The breakthrough came from both fronts, simultaneously. The cybersecurity team found it first a ghost server registered to a shell corporation in Panama, used for encrypted communications between Kensington, his loyal VPs, and a notorious PR consultant in Washington, D.C., known for his skill in orchestrating targeted smear campaigns. The server logs contained the entire playbook of their attack on David, from the initial brainstorming sessions to the invoices from the PR firm. At the same time, the investigators delivered their payload. One of the VPs, a man named Gerald Vance, had a crippling gambling addiction and was deeply in debt to some very unsavory characters. The other, Martin Webb, had been using a company slush fund managed by Kensington himself to finance a lavish lifestyle far beyond his means, including a secret apartment in Soho. They were compromised, vulnerable, and ripe for pressure. David now had the sword, the shield, and the strategic map. It was time to end the war. He called an emergency in-person meeting of the AeroCorp International Board of Directors at their headquarters in Chicago. He gave them less than 24 hours' notice, a power move designed to signal urgency and sow panic. He requested that all key operational heads, including Arthur Kensington and his team, be present to report on recent performance issues. Kensington and his allies walked into the opulent wood-paneled boardroom with an air of cautious confidence. They believed the pressure campaign was working. They saw David as a wounded animal lashing out with a hastily called meeting. They were prepared to feign concern, to talk about market headwinds and unfortunate media cycles, all while subtly painting him as an unstable leader, unable to handle the heat. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. The room was tense. The board members, a collection of seasoned corporate veterans, sat around the enormous mahogany table, their faces grim. David stood at the head of the table, not sitting, projecting an aura of absolute command. Robert Harrison was there off to the side, looking pale and nervous, knowing he was about to witness a corporate bloodbath. "Good morning, everyone." David began, his voice calm and even. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I won't waste your time with pleasantries. We have a crisis, not a crisis of performance or market share or fuel costs. We have a crisis of integrity. Our house is infested." He gestured for an aide who dimmed the lights. The large screen behind David flickered to life. The first image was a screenshot of the tabloid story about his foundation. "For the past several weeks," David said, his voice dropping an octave, "I, and by extension this company, have been the subject of a coordinated malicious smear campaign." He clicked a button. The next slide showed the article about his predatory business practices. The next showed the leaked memo about dynamic fleet allocation. "These were not random events," he continued. "They were targeted attacks designed to undermine my leadership, destabilize the company during a critical transition, and protect a corrupt and incompetent status quo. They were designed to protect the very rot I was hired to remove." Arthur Kensington shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some soothing corporate platitude. "Arthur, please," David said without looking at him. "You'll have your chance to speak." The finality in David's tone silenced him. "For weeks I wondered about the source of these leaks. I wondered who inside this company would be so treacherous, so monumentally stupid, as to sabotage their own ship in the middle of a storm." David paused, letting his eyes travel across the faces of Kensington, Vance, and Webb. And then we found out. The screen changed. It was the screenshot of the signal chat. Our ghosts bite back. An audible gasp went through the room. Kensington's face, usually a mask of patrician charm, turned the color of ash. Vance looked like he was going to be physically ill. Webb stared at the screen, his mouth agape. "This," David said, his voice now like ice, "is a chat between our Chief Operating Officer, Arthur Kensington, our VP of Fleet Logistics, Martin Webb, and our V of North American Routes, Gerald Vance. A conspiracy to defraud this company, to manipulate its stock price, and to defame a fellow executive and board member." He wasn't finished. The next slide showed a complex web of financial transactions, tracing payments from the GVA slush fund to the PR firm in D.C. The next showed phone records between Vance and a known bookie. The next title deeds for Webb's secret Soho apartment. It was a complete and utter vivisection of their professional and personal lives laid bare for the entire board to see. David had not come with accusations. He had come with receipts, an avalanche of them. "So here we are," David said, turning the lights back up. The harsh glare made the three conspirators look even more pale and ghastly. "We have a COO who orchestrates smear campaigns. We have a VP who pays for his mistress with company money. And we have another VP whose gambling debts make him a catastrophic security risk. This is the leadership team that has been running your airline. This is the ghost in the machine." He turned his full attention to Kensington. The older man's charm had vanished, replaced by a sullen, impotent fury. "Arthur," David said, walking slowly toward him. "You once told your friends here that I needed to understand how things work in your world. And I have to admit, you've taught me a valuable lesson. You've taught me that when you find a nest of vipers, you don't just remove one. You burn the whole nest to the ground." He turned back to the board. "I'm giving this board two options. Option A, you terminate the employment of Mr. Kensington, Mr. Webb, and Miss Vance for cause effective immediately. You approve my motion to bring in my own COO, a woman who has successfully restructured 3 Fortune 500 companies. We handle their exit quietly with non-disclosure agreements, so airtight they couldn't order a coffee without violating them. We bury this, and we get back to the business of saving this airline." He let that sink in. "Or option B." He placed a thick binder on the table. "This binder contains everything you've just seen, and much more. It contains enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation into securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. If you choose option B, I will walk out of this room, hand this binder to the U.S. Attorney's office, and call the Wall Street Journal. Your stock will be worthless by noon. Your company will be buried in litigation for the next decade. And some of you, depending on what you knew and when you knew it, may even find yourselves in court alongside them." He looked around the table. "You have 5 minutes to decide. And Arthur," he added, looking at the broken man, "I suggest you use that time to call your lawyer." The boardroom war was over. It had been a blitzkrieg. The old guard hadn't just been defeated, they had been vaporized. David Sterling had proven that his quiet demeanor masked a capacity for strategic ruthlessness that they could never have fathomed. He hadn't just fought their ghosts. He had become the ghost they would be seeing in their nightmares for years to come. The boardroom fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. The choice David Sterling had offered wasn't really a choice at all. It was a surrender. The board members, seasoned predators in their own right, knew when they had been outmaneuvered. They exchanged brief, panicked glances. Their loyalty to Arthur Kensington and his cronies evaporated in the face of their own survival. Before the 5 minutes were up, the chairman of the board, a man with the weary eyes of someone who had seen too many corporate coups, cleared his throat. "The board votes for option A," he croaked. "The terminations are approved." It was done. The ghost in the machine had been exorcised. Arthur Kensington. Martin Webb and Gerald Vance shuffled out of the room. Their careers in ashes, their faces etched with the ruinous shock of total defeat. They were followed by their lawyers, who had been waiting in an adjoining room, and now wore the grim expressions of men facing a long, thankless negotiation. David didn't gloat. He simply nodded, thanked the board, and introduced them to his choice for the new COO. Eleanor Torres, a brilliant, no-nonsense executive who had been waiting on standby. The torch was passed not with a bang, but with the quiet, efficient click of a new management team locking into place. In the year that followed, Global Voyager Alliance underwent a metamorphosis. Under David's ownership and Elena's operational command, the airline was reborn. The cultural rot was systematically scoured away. A new ethos built on transparency, accountability, and genuine customer centricity was instilled. The open feedback portal became a tool for positive change, not just a complaint box. The best ideas from pilots, flight attendants, and ground crews were implemented and rewarded. The airline's reputation began to change. The lounges, once bastions of exclusionary snobbery, became known for their warm, genuine welcome. The on-time performance, once a running joke in the industry, became the best in its class. Profits soared. The stock price reached an all-time high. David Sterling was no longer seen as a vulture capitalist. He was hailed as a visionary, the man who had saved a dying giant. But David knew the victory was more complex than the headlines suggested. He had won the war, but the battles had left their scars. The smear campaign had been a brutal lesson in the nature of power. It had forced him to be as ruthless as his enemies, to delve into a world of private investigators and personal leverage that left a bitter taste in his mouth. He had proven he could win their game, but he was determined to create a company where that game no longer had to be played. One crisp autumn evening, about 18 months after that fateful day at JFK, David found himself with a few hours to spare before a flight to Tokyo. He walked unrecognized into the newly renovated Global Voyager Alliance lounge at Terminal 4. The obsidian desk was gone, replaced with a warmer, open-concept podium of light oak. The lighting was softer, the atmosphere less like a museum, and more like a comfortable, luxurious living room. He handed his solitaire card to a young woman with a kind smile. She swiped it, looked up, and her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Welcome, Mr. Sterling. It's an honor to have you with us. Can I get you anything to start? A glass of champagne, perhaps?" "Just a water is perfect, thank you," he said, smiling back. "And please call me David." He found a quiet armchair in a corner and watched the flow of people. He saw a young family with excited children being treated with patience and warmth. He saw a group of students in hoodies and jeans, probably on a school trip, being welcomed just as graciously as the businessman in the bespoke suit next to them. This was the culture he had fought for. As he sat there, his mind drifted to the two people who had started it all. Isabelle Dubois had vanished from the world of luxury hospitality. A few months after the incident, a former colleague had spotted her working at a high-end retail store on Madison Avenue, folding sweaters. A bitter, poetic irony. She looked tired, her once unshakable pride replaced by a brittle hardness. She had refused to learn, refused to adapt, and the world had moved on without her. Her fate was a quiet, lonely tragedy of her own making. Marco Rossi's story, however, had taken an unexpected turn. After hitting rock bottom, consumed by guilt, he had started volunteering at a youth center in his New Jersey hometown. He discovered a surprising passion and talent for mentorship. He eventually went back to school, got a degree in social work, and now ran an outreach program for at-risk teenagers. A few months ago, he had written a letter to David, care of Sterling Equity. It wasn't an apology filled with excuses. It was a raw, honest accounting of his own failings. "I didn't just fail to do my job that day," Marco wrote. "I failed as a person. I was so insecure, so desperate to be accepted by someone I thought was powerful, that I chose to be cruel. There is no excuse for it. Getting fired was the most humiliating experience of my life, but it was also the most necessary. It forced me to look at the person I was becoming, and I was horrified. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that the lesson you taught me, as brutal as it was not wasted." David had read the letter several times. He had never replied, but he had kept it. Marco's journey was a small, hopeful testament to the human capacity for change. A flight attendant approached him, breaking his reverie. "Mr. Sterling, we'll be ready for pre-boarding for your flight to Tokyo in about 15 minutes. The first suite is all ready for you." "Thank you," David said. He looked around the lounge one last time. He had walked in here as a customer and been treated like a criminal. He had fired the people who wronged him, dismantled a corrupt leadership, and rebuilt a multi-billion-dollar company in his own image. He had faced down the ghosts of the old machine and won. But the real victory, he realized, wasn't the power, the money, or the revenge. It wasn't even the successful company. The real victory was the quiet satisfaction of sitting in this room, a room he now owned, and feeling for the first time like he truly belonged, not because of the card in his wallet, but because he had helped build a place where everyone could. The hard karma had come for them all, but in the end it had delivered not just punishment, but a profound and lasting justice. And so the story of David Sterling and the GVA Lounge comes to a close. It started with a single act of prejudice and ended with the fall of an empire and the birth of a new one. It's a powerful reminder that the choices we make, whether we're a desk agent or a CEO, have ripples we can't even imagine. It shows us that true power isn't just about firing people. It's about having the vision and the courage to build something better in their place. Marco Rossi found redemption. Isabelle Dubois found obscurity. And David Sterling discovered that even after conquering the world, some battles still have to be fought right here on the ground. What did you think of this story of karma and consequence? Who do you think was most transformed by the events? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic justice, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama and reckoning. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.